Good afternoon, everyone. As I say, my name's Walt Holloway. My family was involved. I'm the fifth generation of my family involved with this railroad. When the railroad was first discussed to be formed in 1877, it was held in my great-great-grandfather's store in Forest Hill. And some of my relatives over the years were agents, passenger personnel, but they all worked for the railroad 4 generations. And I'm the fifth because the time I was able to work, the railroad had left Maryland. But we'll see here, the railroad starts in Baltimore and runs up here to York. And the date I have up here, 1901 to 1999. Go ahead with the next slide. Okay, in 1901, you can use, okay. 2 railroads. On September 13th and 14th of 1901, the Baltimore and Lehigh Railroad, which was the Maryland Railroad, and the York Southern, which was the Pennsylvania Railroad, merged to form the Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad. So that was in 1901. Go ahead.
So, excuse me, question for you. If they were called Baltimore, did they have a line into Baltimore, to Lehigh and Baltimore?
Yes, ran from Baltimore, started, the rails for the Baltimore and Lehigh were started in 1881 and got to Delta, where the York Southern was, in 1884. And I didn't take the earlier part, but they're all going. Now here is what the Baltimore station looked like. Cut the light off. Not that one, the top one. Yeah, the next one over. Next one. That one. Down. Okay, now the right one to your left. That's it. All right. Okay. This station was built in 1887, but it was torn down in 1937 so that Howard Street could be built across the Jones Falls Valley. And then they moved a station down underneath of North Avenue. Okay? The original freight house, where people brought their freight or picked up their freight, the milk cartons, cans were unloaded from the baggage cars, and the different milk producers in Baltimore, there was probably a half a dozen of them, Seal Test, Cloverland, that would pick up the milk cans as the Ma and Pa brought the majority of milk from the countryside to Baltimore to be processed, put in the milk bottles, and distributed to the homes. And when they finished processing the milk, they would clean the milk cans and return them back to the railroad, because each milk can had a farmer's name, the railroad name, and the station that the milk cans were picked up from, so they knew where to return them. And when the agents here at the freight house knew, because of the station name, how to put the cans on, so the furthest station up were the first ones they loaded on, and the closest station was the last ones gone. So as the train went north in the afternoon, they could take and unload them as they went. Go ahead. Now, in 1911, this is the new roundhouse that was being built, which is still standing today. For the last 30-some years, it has been the salt house for Baltimore City, that they've kept salt in there to put down in the winter for any bad weather. They have now stopped using it, and they're in the process of negotiating with the Baltimore Trolley Museum for them to take over that facility. Go ahead. Coaling station. There were 2 coaling stations, one in Baltimore here. This wall is still along Jones Falls Road. Jones Falls Road's right over on this side. But the rest of this wood is all kind of deteriorated. Some of it's still standing, but most of it has rotted away over the years. Because the last steam engines we had were in 1954. So no steam engines that would use the coal exist anymore. And the other place was in York, where the engines would run from Baltimore, they'd run to York, they'd reload their coal. There were water tanks in different areas coming up the railroad for them to get water. Go ahead. Now this is one of the first timetables that the railroad used. These were employee timetables. And out there in the other room, I have the original copy of it sitting. But as you can see, they had different rules they had to follow. And this was the schedules for the different trains. And as you see, there was 12, in 1901, there were 12 daily passenger trains. There were 2 daily freight trains. The freight trains ran from Baltimore to York. Not all of the passenger trains ran all the way. Some of them ran from York down to Delta, from Baltimore up to Delta, to Bel Air. There was a late train from Bel Air that ran from Baltimore to Bel Air. It stayed overnight in Bel Air, and it was the first train going south the next morning. But by laws, above Delta in Pennsylvania, they did not allow Sunday trains for many, many years. So that's why you see I've got 6 Sunday trains. They could run from Baltimore to Delta, but they couldn't go any further. That occurred until about 1920, when they finally allowed trains to run on Sundays. Go ahead. The interchange with the railroads. This is the Pennsylvania. This is a yard for the Ma and Pa, where the Pennsylvania would leave cars, or the Ma and Pa would leave cars for interchange. And this other one over here is the B&O. At one time, there were 4 tracks that the B&O had across there. Eventually it got down to 2, and we had 2 interchange tracks between the B&O. And that didn't occur until 1908 that we got the interchange with the B&O.
What are those photographs of? What are you showing us? Where are they?
All right, 29th Street Bridge, or no, this is Howard Street going across. This is across Jones Falls from where the roundhouse on Jones Falls Road is. That's where the connection, original connection for the outside world, for the mom and pa, to the, at that point when they were made a connection, it was the Northern Central Railroad, which eventually was taken over by the Pennsylvania Railroad. There's what was known as the Baltimore Belt Railroad, which crossed over the Ma and Pa in about the same area. And a few years ago, the B&O had an accident with below their bridge that crossed over Jones Falls Valley. They had a couple of rail cars went off the track and damaged the trolley museum tracks, and they were down. It actually knocked out their power plant and damaged their rails, and it took them 6 months to get everything back in order for them to go back in service. So this is all in the Jones Falls Valley. Go ahead. This is about 1950. This is the Baltimore Yard. This is the roundhouse. This is the coal companies that operated off of the Ma and Pa. They had a lot of coal business. Ryan's was one, and I can't think of the other name right now, but there was 4 different coaling docks that were there in the valley, and they would supply the coal to heat the houses in central Baltimore. Go ahead.
Is that Falls Road?
Huh?
Is that Falls Road, that road there?
Yeah. Because coming out of the valley, getting up to higher ground, the railroad a lot of times would pull some of the freight cars, and these happened to be tank cars, up to Evergreen, which was their first station, and leave them on a siding for the freight train after they got up the hill to pick those up to take them on to wherever they were designated. And that was a common practice. Go ahead. Winehurst Avenue. This is just south of Winehurst. Train coming up. You can see a couple kids here watching the train come by. Go ahead. And here is near Notre Dame. There was no actual station. There was a platform that they had, and most of the business there were Catholic nuns. Because up in Ferncliff area was a retirement home for the nuns. And they got on the train from the school here at Notre Dame and would go out to the retirement home.
Is
There-
that Glen Meadows?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have pictures, and I don't know if I have one, from Forest Hill, some nuns from St. Ignatius standing there on the platform to go south, which were probably going to the retirement home because it was the nearest transportation for them. Go ahead. All right. Shepherd. There's the waiting platform. There's a siding going off here, which was going to the mental institution at Shepherd. They had, for their complex of buildings, they had a coal burning furnace, and we used to deliver gondolas of coal to that facility. It was in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Coal was the main energy source for this country. In the 30s is when the electrification was started to run electric lines in communities. Here in the Harford area, it was about 1932 that Harford County was finally getting electricity. Bel Air got electricity a little earlier because the mill down the street here had a steam generator that ran the roller mill. And it produced enough power, more than what they needed to run their mill, so they put up electric lines to put lights on the streets for the street lights, and several of the well-to-do families also were connected, such as Dr. Kelly's place over here, Liriodendron, and got their electricity from that operation. It was in the sometime in the 30s that Alexis Shriver started the Bel Air Electric Company down at Winter's Run and Route 1. And that was where the electricity was brought into town and the surrounding areas. Go ahead. A little further up, Woodbine Station, and right on the other side of this gas station is Charles Street. And this was it. The original station is over on the other side of the train, was a little wooden shed that was built when the railroad came through in the 1880s. Go ahead.
Are these tracks the ones that are used, the light rail? Because some of these
No.
stops are sounding familiar.
No, light rail uses some of the old Northern Central, further down into the city, going out towards Cockeysville. A lot of people confuse these two companies, but the only place they met was in the Jones Fall Valley, and then again in York. Now, the Ma and Pa was 77 miles from Baltimore to York. The Northern Central had a straight line. They were 42 miles between the two cities because they went straight where they came out through the countryside to pick up business and a lot of farm products. Harford County was big agricultural center, and the majority of their business was from the canning industry. There was 500 and some canneries operating in Harford County. So we had a lot of mills also in Harford County. Now this is Towson, That's the Towson Station, right there. This is train is crossing, and within 100 yards, they were going on a bridge over top of York Road. Go ahead. Now, this is just show. This is where the train was headed to cross this bridge. In the early years, up till about 1905, when this steel bridge was put in, there were several lawsuits against the railroad. It was a wooden trestle over here like this that was here. And they complained about traffic problems because didn't have much room to get cars between the uprights. And it went to court, and the railroad was made to take the trestle out and put the bridge in. And this other one, the railroad ran through what is now Towson University. At the time, it was Towson State College. And this trestle, the old jail building is off to the right, and that's where it came, and where we showed the station a minute ago came off, and you had about 50 yards from the end of this trestle to where the station was. Go ahead. Now this is an interesting photograph. Black & Decker's back up here. And there's a station you can just barely see here, which was Towson Estates. And over on this side was Towson Heights, two different ones. But Black & Decker's back around the corner here. And this area here was known as Udallwood. Right now, there's a big shopping center down here. And after the railroad left, Goucher Boulevard was built through here. This was all filled in, the road, up to this height. They took all this hills out and filled it all in. You can go, I say, this Towson Heights over here, there's a road that goes back in there that you can go down to this area at the base and see where the height of the train was.
Wow.
That, you know, is all filled in. And the gas and electric company bought the land after the railroad pulled out in '58. And way down the line before you get to the Loch Raven Boulevard, they have a couple of power stations. Go ahead. And this is a Towson. Wasn't much, just a little shelter for people to wait, and mainly it was commuters going downtown that were picked up to go downtown in the morning and be brought back in the afternoon. Sometimes the workers, house workers that came out of the city to take care of children or clean the houses and whatever, would ride the trains and get off. Go ahead. Jennifer's Trestle. This was Cedar Hill Road, and this is Cromwell Bridge Road. Now this crosses, and the bridge right over here crosses the Gunpowder, and the road goes on to Glenarm. Okay. Oakley Station. Most of the, what we call flag stops, because there was no agents here. And I don't know any of you were out there, saw there was a green and white flag that were kept in these stations, that if somebody was there and needed the train to stop, they just get the flag and wave it. But if you waved your arms, the train would stop and pick you up. Okay?
Was there a corresponding commercial shed at this area, or was this just for passengers?
Just for passengers. There was really no freight. There was no anything. There was more passengers hauled in the early days than freight. And most of the freight went to areas like Towson, Glenarm, Bel Air, Red Lion, Forest Hill, areas that had different businesses that could support the railroad. Go ahead. Okay, Loch Raven. This is the second station at Loch Raven, because the first one of the passenger cars, they used to rock back and sideways, and the train was coming through and hit the overhang and kind of took the roof off the building one time, and so they had to take and repair that. The railroad had what they called building and bridge group that would keep the bridges repaired and repair anything on the buildings. Go ahead. Another little small shed, Somerville. Now, a lot of people don't know, they think of Loch Raven, but actually there was a siding, and you can't see it in the picture, that was built to build the Loch Raven reservoirs in 1912, 1920, and then another third time that they went and brought supplies to the companies that were modifying the whole Loch Raven area. The 1912, it was about a 20-foot high dam that they built. They added another 12 feet in 1920, and then it was like about 1924, 26, another 8 feet is what it is now, that were added to the heights of the dam. And the backup goes several miles up the stream. I mean, it's a huge reservoir that is there. Go ahead. Notchcliffe looks almost the same. Now, this is Notchcliffe Road, and you can see it. Over up on the hill was the retirement home for the Catholic nurses. And between here and Glenarm was another little station that you will find on no timetables called Glenview. It was a cement building, and it had a wood roof. The wood roof has since deteriorated, but the cement sides are still there. That was built originally in 1905 by John Brown, who was the vice president of the railroad. He was building a hotel on the hill behind this shed, but it never got used because in 1906, before they finished building the hotel, it burned. And there was nothing left of it. Because in those days, the fire engines were very small and very few anywhere. So by the time somebody noticed the fire, it was pretty well destroyed. Okay, go ahead. Okay, Glenarm. Right here. FX Hooper was a printing press manufacturer for wood and cardboard. They made presses for people to print on their boxes, because in those days most shipping containers were wooden boxes. And then eventually they changed by the 40s into cardboard printing, where it would print the box and make the box all in one, right? They would ship out their finished presses on flat cars. Originally, the station was in the corner front of this building. This station, which is still standing, it's being rehabilitated. It got just last year a historic preservation certificate for it, and they got money to. The owners live in Florida, but that building was moved from its original location. The original was in the store, and then they put a building up, and that burned. And this building was the Baldwin station. They decided Glenarm needed a station more than Baldwin needed one. So they loaded that station in Baldwin on a flat car, balanced it, and brought it, which is about a mile, down here and unloaded it in Glenarm.
Yeah, right on Glenarm Road.
Right. Glenarm Road is right between these buildings. It's coming around the corner and going through here. And you can just barely see up here, Charles Adler was an inventor, and he worked for a while for the Monpau Railroad. This is the first traffic device. It's a bell that would ring when the train was coming to let people know there was a train en route. He later went on, after he left the Monpau, and went to work for the aviation industry, and a lot of the safety devices on planes and at airports were his inventions. Yeah, go ahead. Hyde Station, store, railroad depot, post office in this building, which is still standing today. It's had several different businesses in there, but you see the train sitting here stopped. the crews used to stop here. They liked the food. They went in, got the food, and then got back on the train and took it further north. And right in this area along the tracks is where Samuel Hyde had his big canning operation. And the main thing was known as Egyptian corn, that he would ship out thousands and thousands of cans of Egyptian corn every year. And all the fields behind there used to grow the corn. That was a big, so there was a siding there for that cannery because it was one that sold. They would send, when they would send stuff out, probably 3 or 4 cars at a time. And that during the canning season, that was almost daily. They would send out 2 to 3 boxcars of canned corn. Okay. Baldwin Station. That's the replacement, and it was around 1964, I believe it burned. But before here, this is a southbound train. Back at Baldwin Road, there's a house, which was the original Baldwin Station. A Dr. Baldwin. It was his house and his doctor's office that he used as the original train station. But because his business got bigger, they ended up putting a station in. Okay? Little Gunpowder, Baltimore and Harford County borders. The station, this is the little bridge, and you can't see it, but there is the remains of a flat car right here that they used more as a support and to deflect some of the water from taking out the vents that held the trestle up. Okay? Harry? All right, this is just north. Had just come off the trestle and known as the long siding. This was one of the passing sidings for north and southbound trains. There were several along the railroad where they would do that. In the timetables they had marked the different sidings where they would have train meets so that they could train. This picture is probably about 1952. Okay. All right, this is interesting. Laurelbrook Road, horse and buggy. All right, this is the trestle. Now down here, at the base here, on both sides, if you travel Laurelbrook Road, off of either Pleasantville Road or coming out of Fallston, old Fallston Road, will take you down here. This was a wooden trestle at one time. And there was an accident there. There was 2 engines in the front of a train, pulling a train. It was a passenger train, and the wooden trestle decided it was too much weight, and everything came down into the valley. There were 4 employees that died in the accident. And it took them about 2 months to get this new steel bridge to replace the wooden trestle. And what they would do, they would run trains up to here, and they would run trains down to the other side there, and they would walk the people down, across, and up to the other side to switch trains until they got the new bridge in. Go ahead. Okay, Laurelbrook. Now, the trestle was right down here. This is an entry. This is the second station at there. At one time, it was a man station that they had, but there wasn't a lot of business anymore. Just beyond this, and you have the hill here, and this area here now is a driveway to a house behind it. And if you look across Laurelbrook Road, which is just beyond here, you'll see the flat area that where the track was, and it's a wide area because it had a siding there, because at one time there was a big cannery. Once that cannery, probably in the 1920s, stopped operating, they took out the siding. They didn't need the man station anymore, so they put this little one in. But in the 50s, around 54, when passenger trains stopped running in September of 54, a couple of high school students from the Fallston area had stole some milk cans, because at that time the different creameries were picking up milk cans at the farms, and they stole a couple of the cans. Well, they wanted to see how fireworks work. They took one milk can full of fireworks, put it inside this shed, and lit them all. Well, there was nothing left of the shed. Boom. They never did catch the kids, but the second milk can mysteriously returned to the milk platform. So they didn't use it to do any other damage. Okay, next. Okay, Watson Trestle. This is just 200 yards further up the road. Laurelbrook Road is over here. This goes around, and the railroad crossed Laurelbrook Road after it came into Harford County 4 different times before it got to Fallston. Go ahead. Now this is Fallston. Now you can see there's several tracks. These are one of the work sheds and the carpenter's shop. This is the station. But another interesting building is this one right here. It was Robinson's store, known as the lower store of Fallston. In 1926, Milton, Samuel, and Milton's wife came from Lancaster and bought the store. Their last name was Klein's. This was their first store in Harford County. And we have in the 20s, they gave out little hand dictionaries. as a souvenir in the store. We have a copy of that in the cabinet in the back there. Then they kept the store until Milton's son, Ralph, went into the Army in 1945, 46. I'm not sure exactly when. It was in that time frame. So they decided to retire. They were up in age and sold the store to the Emrights, who bought the store. But when Ralph came back from the Army in 1940, late 47, early 48, he wanted a store. So my relatives, where the original meeting to form this railroad, decided to sell the store. Now, at the store, you had International Harvester equipment that they sold. So they kept that and moved that to Bel Air and sold the store in Forest Hill, which is the brick building on the corner of Rocks Road and Jarrettsville Road. That was the start of the Klein Empire. Okay, go ahead. Now, across what is now 152 and the Falston Middle School is sitting where this yard was, which is what was used by the bridge and building crews to keep their supplies, to go out and repair whatever needed to be repaired. Go ahead. All right, this is a 1913 picture of the Bel Air station. You got buggies here. The couple of main hotels, the Eagle Hotel, Granger Hotel, used to have carriages and eventually buses that would stop at the station and pick up passengers who were going to stay in their facility. So the freight house, original freight house, is here. That was, in later years, that was redone. Across, you can't see real well, over here, building still standing, which was McComas Brothers. They sell farm implements, lumber, hardware. The buildings are still there. So go on to the next slide. This is one of the last, 1952, it was the last trip that Engine 6 ran because it broke down and they weren't going to repair it. So, go ahead. I want to show the aerials. Okay. This is just showing the state, and this has got the new warehouse, the siding that McComas Brothers, that behind that building were coal bins that they would do. This is an aerial view. This is Corbin's Ice House, because up until the 60s, a lot of people still had ice boxes. During the summer, they sold ice. In the winter, they sold coal. And eventually they got into fuel oil, which is what they sell now, fuel oil and propane. Go ahead. And this is an oversized view. The mill right here. Now, the big mill building was all torn out a few years ago. Over here was Amoco Petroleum. This was Yeah. Another station. This building right here is now still operation. It is craft brewery building. That's right down the street. I think it's International Craft. Independent. Okay. Go ahead.
Can you point out?
Wait, back up.
Slide, can you point out where the train station was? I couldn't make it out.
Right there.
That's the train station.
That's the train station. Yep. Right now, this area is a rental place. They got storage building.
So that's where the trail is then.
And which direction would we be in currently sitting here?
I can't hear you.
Sitting here in this building, where would we be on that map?
It is, we would be over in here.
Okay,
Yeah, it's the next 2 blocks behind you
okay.
is where all this was. And some of it still is. Okay, go ahead. The first picture we found, Bynum Station. This part of the station has been torn down, but this part is still standing. On Bynum Road, up in the Marywood area. And this house and Pine Tree are still there. Still lived in. Okay? Now, this is interesting. You got sawhorse and you got planks that they're standing on. And the reason, and there's a couple other places the same thing. The train came down here to pick up passengers. Instead of the people having to walk down to the ground and then try and go up on the steps to get in the car, they would take these planks and put them out onto the end of the car, and people could walk straight onto the cars.
Not me.
So this is, that's my aunt, great aunt. They took a lot of pictures in the 1900 to 1910 era.
Nice.
And I was going through some picture books doing my genealogy, and I found a bunch of these pictures of the railroad.
That's cool.
Okay, go ahead.
Nice coats.
Okay, this is Forest Hill. A southbound train. Station is still standing. This was the maintenance crew, the section crew, they called them, that would go out. They had an area of the railroad that they would maintain. And each of the section crews every morning would go their section of the railroad and check and make sure all the rails were still in place, the switches worked, nothing needed to be replaced or repaired before train came through. And they did that, each section crew did their own section every day to make sure the railroad was safe to operate. Go ahead. Back to Forest Hill, this was the original station. And that's about 1901. In June 10th, 1914, it burned. And it's hard to tell, but here's the rubble. This building over here was a GAR Hall, which is the Grand Army of the Republic for the Union soldiers of the Civil War. By this time, there were very few soldiers from either side of the Civil War still alive. And in Bel Air in 1915, the Armory, which is down the street here, was dedicated, and the Harford County survivors from both sides, which were 10, marched down Main Street for the dedication of the Armory. So, because the store burned, it was the largest commercial retail store in Harford County. And they moved into that GAR building the next day and operated and hired several people and built the present store that's standing there. Now, this is June 14th, June 15th, they were working. The railroad supplied material to build the station that is standing there. And both the store and the station opened on October 20th, 1914. So in a little over 3-4 months, they built the two buildings.
That was the Klein's store? That was the Klein's store?
It wasn't the Klein's yet. It didn't become Klein's until 47, 48. This was still, that was still the, in 1914, it had been incorporated as E. Tucker and Company. And E. Tucker is Eli Tucker, who had married John B. Rowe's daughter, oldest daughter, Sarah. And he became a partner in the company when they got married in 1869. And so when John B. died in 1891, him and his mother-in-law became the owners of the company. So, next one. Okay. Now this is a 1903 Rocks Road, Jarrettsville Road. The bank hasn't been built over here. This building, which is still standing at that intersection, is now a animal hospital and veterinarian. But they added a section over here that's not there in those days. So, and for 40 to 50 years, it was a barber shop. That was the barber shop in Forest Hill. Go ahead.
Excuse me a second.
Yeah?
I've got a personal question.
Yeah?
My grandparents had a farm on the west side of Jarrettsville Road between Forest Hill and Hickory. And behind their farm was a railroad track
Yeah?
that was still there when I was a kid in the middle 50s. Where was that train track going? Was that going over to the,
Bel Air?
but how was it, where was it going north? I mean,
North, it came up where, if you know the area right now, where the recreation fields are, behind the firehouse.
I'm too long gone from the area.
Oh.
But I mean, okay, just Hickory Church. I mean, what about the Catholic church there at Hickory?
Well, it turned and went down to Bynum, where right now it pretty well follows the Ma and Pa walking trail from Forest Hill on to Bel Air. But Who?
Friends Park, right there at the intersection.
Yeah, Friends Park. Yeah, it curved from the station. Right now, there's a firehouse, then Friends Park, and it curved going south, kind of east, and follows its way down to Bel Air.
Oh, okay, so you're saying that was the route, that was the area between Forest Hill and Bel Air, not north, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, okay. Next. Oh, the Gross Trestle. Sometimes called the Sharon Trestle, which it's not. On Sundays, between 1935 and 1950, different times, usually between June and October, people used to rent the railroad and run excursion trains. This is an excursion train that came out of Philadelphia, came down the Pennsylvania Railroad to Baltimore, crossed over to the Ma and Pa, where I showed the connections was. And these are people that were let off the train to take photographs. The train backed up so it could come back across the bridge that they could take pictures. I mean, that was something that they loved to do. Now, go ahead. All right, now, this is Sharon, and you can barely see it, but here's a trestle. That is the actual Sharon trestle. The over here, back over here around the corner, is where that Gross trestle was. The only thing, this building here was used as a station. It was a store, and they used to rent a room in the store for the railroad. And there's a little shed, and you can't see it in the picture right there. Right there. Was the only thing that was actually belonged to the railroad. It was a little freight shed that they had. Go ahead. Further up, the next station, Ferncliff. Now, this is a milk platform. That's the south milk platform. That's the north milk platform. And the shed is another shed. All of the south milk platforms had a covering. Anybody got an idea why? Because the milk cans were brought in early morning for the train to pick up. But the sun was also coming up. To keep from the sun getting on the milk cans and spoiling the milk, they built these contraptions on top of these sheds to keep the milk cans cool until they got on the train to go south. The north one is where the empty cans that have been washed and cleaned were left by the night train for the farmers to pick up to fill up the next morning. Okay.
Do you know whether the farmer actually did it, or was there some sort of a delivery service for the cans?
No, the farmers did it themselves. It was later on, after, in the 40s, where the milk companies started sending out trucks to pick up the milk at the farms.
At the end of the lane, yeah.
Yeah,
That was a big boom
Yeah.
for the farmers.
yeah. Because 1928, Western Maryland Dairy built a processing plant in Pilesville. And so a lot of the farmers would either deliver, or they had tank trucks that went out to the farms and picked up the milk. Next. You can't see too well, but this is just after English Trestle, and you can see right here, Rocks Road, and the train right here going. I mean, it ran along that road. Go ahead. The Rocks Bridge crossing over Deer Creek. It was abandoned when the Maryland Division was torn up in November, December of '58. And the bridge was given to the county to do with whatever they wanted. Well, they decided they didn't want it. So they hired a scrapper to come in and take the bridge down, and the steel was his to do with whatever he wanted to do. Okay, next. All right. It's hard to see, but here's the Rocks water tank, and you can't tell it here, but the Ramsey Hotel. This is taken from the King and Queen seat. That's the Ramsey Hotel, and this right here was the small railroad station at the Rocks. Okay? All right. Minefield, here you got the shed, the other shed down here. There's the waiting shed. This building is still standing. It's a house, private house, and this running along here is Greer Nursery Road. If you come through this area, you'll see it's really flat here because that's the main track, and at one time there was a canning house and a siding there, but that was torn out sometime in the 30s. Okay, next. Street. This was a store, a post office, a meeting room in Highland. The community is known as Highland. But they couldn't use Highland once the railroad started hauling mail because there was another Highland station in Maryland. So they had to come up with another name. Well, most of the land in the area was owned by the Street family. So it became the Street post office and railroad station. And now half of the northern half of the county has a street address. But that building burned about 6 or 8 years ago, and the family that owned it, was living in it, has since rebuilt it and we're back living in it again. So, go ahead.
Which is where currently?
Huh?
Where was that building currently?
The building is just west of Miller Road. Where the train ran through there, it was down through a cut. And after the railroad left, the county didn't want to keep the bridge that was there across the road, so they took the bridge out and filled that whole area in with dirt and made it all the same height. But as you go around the curl, there's a big white building that was Snodgrass's auto dealership in the early years, and it's still an auto repair building. As you pass that, the road kind of curves to the east and then back to the west, and down in the valley there, you can see this building. Go ahead. All right, Pilesville. The abutments are still there. This is now old Pilesville Road. This building is still standing. Of course, this trestle is all gone. And it went over and then crosses the stream there. And the abutments for that are still there. Go ahead. See if I have the other one. No, okay. And this is the station. And your great-grandfather, that's the station they would have been in. Okay? They are two it looks like one building, but there are actually, it's about a foot between those two buildings. They did not connect. Okay. And just beyond this is where Western Maryland Creamery, I think that's the next one. Go ahead. Yeah, okay. The Western Maryland Creamery. The main line, and then the siding that they would pick up cars. And they owned another creamery that they bought up in Woodbine in Pennsylvania. And they would ship material. They shipped out milk. They shipped out cream. And some of the stuff was shipped to the other building for processing. And then the railroad didn't have an icing plant to use its old equipment. So they would rent mechanical refrigerator cars from the Pennsylvania Railroad to haul this milk that went to New York, to Chicago, to Philadelphia, and they would send out between the two places 3 to 4 cars a day going out. Go ahead.
Does that building still exist back?
No, none of that is all gone. There's a construction company or something in the area, and it's got cement blocks and whatever as you go up the old road.
The Albany's have that, and they have all their building materials and things like that. It's just a
Yeah.
a stuff lot.
Maryland Green Marble. This crane is still standing. Over here are the processing buildings, and in the quarry, they would cut blocks of marble. There were probably 10-ton blocks. They had small railroad cars, and in the bottom of the quarry, the old turntable that used to set at Whiteford, they put in the bottom of the quarry, and they had tunnels that they would dig off of the ends. They would roll these rail cars, little rail cars, into the tunnels, cut their block of marble, roll them onto the cars, bring it back out the center, and the crane would connect on the car, bring it up, and go into one of their process buildings. And they would process it, cut it into sheets. And if you look out here in our lobby, you'll see at the base is the green marble that came from this quarry, and the other quarry, that material they found. The company was owned by a company in Vermont, and they had another green marble operation in Vermont, and this one here in Cardiff, Maryland. And this marble over the years. It was used in the Empire State Building, the main Philadelphia Post Office, the Washington Post Office, the Senate Office Building, the Union train station in Washington, and I couldn't tell you, the White House, yes, also has some of this green marble in it. So it was very popular. And people have been looking for it, but it's
Gone.
not available anymore. Okay. All right. Dooley Road. And it's partly in Pennsylvania, partly in Maryland. The front of the station, Robinson Brothers, okay, to about right here, this is Pennsylvania. From here over is in Maryland. And talking with the family, very funny story. Originally, the office for the building was in this section of the building. Phones, whatever. But most of their products came out of Baltimore. For them to call Baltimore, it was a long distance call. So they found out by getting C&P Telephone Company, which was the Maryland telephone company, to put a phone in the back part of the store, they could call Baltimore without costing money.
Oh, wow.
And once they did that, but this building originally, it was torn down in the mid-70s, but it was over 100 years old. It was originally a carriage factory. In talking with the family, when they started cleaning out, the third floor up in the attic still had thousands and thousands of carriage parts. And most of it are all junked because they didn't have anybody who would buy it. So I ended up junking it. Go ahead. All right, this is the Delta area, the Delta station. This is a siding here, and you had oil tanks in the back here. You can see them right here. And this is what was known as the Slate Ridge branch, or the Peach Bottom branch. Originally, it went down to the river at Peach Bottom. Now, Peach Bottom was on both sides of the river. And originally, when they were building the railroads, they wanted to put a bridge across the Susquehanna. But it was such an expensive operation, they never did. But in later years, after we left Maryland, they started building the nuclear plant at Peach Bottom. And further up the road here, near the Funkhauser operation, they took and built an extended line down to the nuclear plant because they were trying to take and set up to remove nuclear waste from the plant to take it out by rail. But everybody got upset about that and wouldn't allow them to do that. So now they take it out by truck on the roads. So, but I mean, that's what happened. Okay. Going up the road, Bryanville Station, It no longer stands. The tracks ran right along here in front of the station. Now go ahead. Castlefin. The station was here. There's a covered bridge crossing, this is Muddy Creek. It was not much of a place. It was just mainly local produce, milk. There was a mill there at one time, a grain mill, but this is probably in the 1920s, and by the 30s that was pretty well gone. Go ahead. South Side. The only thing at South Side was this cannery. That beans, corn, carrots, there's all kinds of stuff that was canned. Go ahead. All right. Woodbine. This was the station. You can't tell, this is Woodbine Road. Over here was where the other creamery was that I talked about earlier. And they operated, these tracks weren't torn up until they started in 1985, starting to tear these tracks up. Some of the tracks are still there that are used just north of here is Muddy Creek Forks, which still operates about 5 miles of track that they were able to secure instead of being torn up. And that's the Mampa Preservation Society. They have train rides there. They have the Grove store. And they just bought the Grove house about a year and a half ago. Go ahead. Bridgeton, another station, all gone. But these are, I say this is the station, and there was a siding right here at that place. Go ahead. This is an interesting spot, Bruce. It was no station, anything, but the guy that owns this house, he bought a caboose, he bought a boxcar, and incorporated them into his house. So, you know, and it's still there, but no tracks. Okay, go ahead. Muddy Creek Forks. I say they operate on the weekends. Usually, I think they start in May through September is most of their operating time, but they have special events there all the time. And they run some Christmas trains. Mostly they just got a new engine that they had bought and had it rebuilt. So, and a passenger car that they fixed up. And but most of the time they were running speeder trains over most of their mileage. But they've got this other engine and a baggage car and a caboose.
Diesel?
Huh? Diesel.
Diesel.
Yeah, they're all diesel. No steam. They do. There's a traveling steam engine that they've had there. It's been at Stewartstown. It's been there. It's been at New Freedom, where there are other rail facilities. It's been up to Strasburg. So, yeah, there's several engines that travel around the country. They get invited and they truck it in, and we'll pull trains, let them ride behind a steam engine. Okay, next. High Rock. Another creamery was right over here. The sign right there says High Rock is sitting out there on the table. I just got that last week.
Good for you.
Yeah. So the building is gone. The Preservation Society owns this land, and they're building a building. They put a switch in to be able to take their equipment out of Muddy Creek instead of sitting outside all year long, that they can put it in these buildings that they're building and work on them and keep them better preserved.
Oh, yeah,
So,
good idea.
yeah, go ahead. Laurel, that station sign is right out there. The hotel is, the ruins of the hotel is there, but that probably in the 1950s fell down. This is the station right here, and it is a craftsman shop. He does stained glass windows, signs, doors, different things out of that building. Okay? Now, just beyond here, there's a hunting and fishing club that owns, from just beyond that was a bridge, which is still there. But beyond that bridge, this hunting and fishing club owns the right-of-way, and they use little go-karts or golf carts to have their people get around to do their hunting or fishing. They have about a mile of right-of-way there that they take care of. Go ahead. Fenmore, it was just a small station that's gone. All open country. A lot of these areas now are housing developments, but that's everywhere. Go ahead. Bougainville, they had a fire back here, and you can see some of the damage there. But that building's still standing, but it had the fire in 1990. Go ahead. Benton, that's now a house that somebody bought it, and it's the house that they live in now. Go ahead. All right, you can't see. It's the only picture we found, because this building, there's a little building right here. And that's the only picture we have found of this station, which was gone. In the 1930s. That station was burned, but that's the only thing we have on it. Go ahead. Springville, sign right there. That house is still standing, private home. At the time, it was a store and a station. Go ahead. Red Line. Red Line was one of the busy places for the railroad. A lot of sidings. The Red Lion Table Company, Red Lion Cabinet Company, which is an interesting operation. I think everybody's heard of Bendix. They built radios in the early years, in the 30s and the 40s, for the railroad companies when they were getting away from the telegraph and getting into radios to be used. They also built televisions. Well, the Red Line Cabinet Company built the television cabinets. They in turn shipped them to Baltimore, where the top of Joppa Road, just west of Loch Raven, where they had a plant. I'm not sure whether they still have a plant there or not anymore, is where the cabinets where they assembled the televisions, then loaded them back on boxcars, and the railroad took them down to the B&O in Baltimore, to the connection, who took them to the west side of Baltimore, where they had a large warehouse. So that's where they would ship them out to the world. But we had a lot of traffic back and forth between them. Go ahead, Mary. Dallastown. Dallastown Railroad was built in 1899 and leased to the Ma and Pa for 100 years. And it was a siding just out of Red Line that went up, and the train had to back up the siding to Dallastown. So they had you can see it right here. The conductor would stand here at the back of the train, and he had a control that he could push and let the engineer know, stop the train. Okay, go ahead. Yo Station. Sign is out there also. All three of those signs, I just got this last week. This here was later years a hotel, but in the early years, it was a cigar manufacturing plant. And the community in this area of Pennsylvania was large into cigar manufacturing. And they had tobacco brought in from other places, and they had locals who brought tobacco in. The Amish grew a lot of tobacco up there. And they would process it, pack it up, and ship it out. Go ahead. Relay, another little station. That building right there was the station. It was it's a private house. It was a little store at one time, and used as a station. Go ahead. Springwood Park. At one time, there was a pavilion setting up here. Other time, it was just a platform. They had at the park a big swimming pool, a big dance hall. They had a food pavilion, and they ran special trains during the summer just to the park and back, and would take people. And They did that for 20 years. Go ahead, Mary. Ore Valley, another little area in Pennsylvania. Nothing is standing anymore. Go ahead. Benroy, that building's all done. Camp Betty Washington Road is the area that it is. The railroad tracks along here. Just another little station stop. Go ahead. Plank Road. There was a little gravel platform that was standing there, and you wave and get the train to stop for you. Go ahead. All right, and then talk about some of the other flag stops that we had. Go ahead. Girard Avenue. I mean, it just in close to where the main station was in York. It's just another little flag stop. Go ahead. There's the station and warehouse, still standing. It's operated by the York Housing Development or agency. Is in that building now. Tracks are right here. Go ahead. Now, Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad, on the other side, it says Pennsylvania Railroad. That was the end of the one and to the other until Conrail was broken up and ended up part of this track became, it was not the Maryland, Pennsylvania, because on December 31st, 1999, the York Rail, which is a company that Emmons created in the 1980s, and the Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad merged and became York Railroad. And therefore, the Maryland and Pennsylvania ceased to exist. Now, the equipment, the engines and whatever they had, until just 2 years ago, still had the Maryland and Pennsylvania name on the side of the engines, diesel engines that they had. And under the cab with the road number, it had YRC, which stood for the York Railroad Company. But all the things, even York Rail is still in existence, but it was sold in 2012 to a company, Gleason and Wyoming, which is a conglomerate of about 56 small railroads around the country.
Wow.
So, but they own it, and their engines are painted orange and black, and they have a little sign on the side of the engine with Y and R. Go ahead. It's, and this is just some things in York. Pershing Street in York, there's street running, and the end of the track that they got for the Conrail breakup runs over to Hanover, Pennsylvania, where it meets up with CSX. Go ahead. And that is the end of my presentation.